the agency reports, and I think we have New Mexico first.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Gallegos. I am the State Maintenance Engineer with the New Mexico Department of Transportation. I am completely new in this position. I've been here an entire 3 months. So I think this conference is the first one I've attended associated with asphalt, and I wish I could tell you I was an expert, but I'm not. So I've learned a lot more in the past 3 months in asphalt than I did my whole 20-year career so far, so I'm learning as we go. One thing I did learn at 10 o'clock on Tuesday is that I was doing this presentation. So, yeah, I didn't even draw a straw. They didn't give me that choice. So here I am, and this is the information I put together. I noticed a lot of the other presentations had a lot of data, funding information, obviously because I don't have access to that right now. I don't have that. What I want to talk to you about is some of the steps that we at the DOT, New Mexico Department of Transportation have taken to get to where we are. And in my opinion, and seeing what we've done, we have a very good program in pavement preservation in that we have the planning tools in place, we're working on the funding, and most importantly, I'd like to say that the districts here, the 6 districts that we have, work really hard to identify locations where we want to do pavement preservation, ask us to collect the data and determine what to do, and then they actually do the execution of the plan and make sure everything gets done, because they're the ones responsible for their districts and respond to the constituents in that area. So a lot of the accolades that we do in completing our program are really tied to what the districts and the patrol specifically do in those areas. So for you guys to know that is that our districts are probably the hardest working ones in the pavement preservation area. Just to give you a little background, I think John had spoken to this the first day when he introduced our state, is that we do have the 6 districts. We have 4 northern districts, as I classify them as northern districts, where we get a little cooler and our construction season's a little bit shorter. In the south, districts 1 and 2, it's a lot like the Arizona climate, where we have a longer construction season. Sometimes when it doesn't snow, it's actually 12 months out of the year. So we take advantage of trying to do as much pavement preservation in the north when we have our summer months and things like that as best we can. But that gives you an idea of how we have to address the climate and things like that. Our state is probably a majority rural. We really only have 1 urban area, which is District 3, which constitutes the Albuquerque Metropolitan Area Planning District, and that's where we are right now. That one is mainly a bunch of the smaller communities in and around Albuquerque, so that one just has a lot of the urban environment. For that reason, we don't have a chip seal crew in that area, but all the other 5 districts are spread out. As you know, we're not very populous, but we're a big state. So we have a lot of roadways that we have to maintain. We have our 3 interstates that run through the state, but a lot of our US and New Mexico routes are the ones that really need a lot more of the preservation attention because they don't get as much federal funds. So those are the ones that our districts try to tackle the most. Biggest tools, in my opinion, what we use for our pavement preservation is that we utilize our STIP program. The DOT has a 5-year plan in identifying our projects that we're going to implement, and the most important one is the baseline plan that we're going to be doing this forthcoming year. So in looking at the STIP that we put together for this year, 15 of the 45 projects are classified and characterized as pavement preservation projects. A lot of those are primarily on the interstates, obviously because of the volumes, but we also have some smaller communities where we're going to throw a lot of money on. That gives us the opportunity and the ability to leverage our federal funds for that program and not just use the state funds. Another tool that we have specifically in my department, the State Maintenance Bureau, is that we've put together 8 price agreements. Each of those price agreements addresses a different methodology for pavement preservation. So we give the districts that tool that they have. We've already negotiated with contractors and identified them. They can then approach those contractors once they identify what method they want to utilize. That expedites the process and gives the districts a lot more leverage in determining how to proceed with the pavement preservation. The last one, obviously, is our internal crews that John had talked about in introducing this conference, that we have our internal chip seal crews. Again, 5 of the 6 districts have them. We keep them very busy in the construction season to get these projects done. We make sure before the season starts, we have areas where we plan, we place chips, we get everything prepared and get the equipment. That way when the season comes, they can hit the ground running and start construction under ideal conditions, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later on. So those are the three tools that essentially we primarily focus on. Obviously, we have a lot more smaller components, but this probably constitutes 90% of our pavement preservation program. Again, I think I've talked about all these. Our STIP is basically the construction projects that we put together. We have a lot of planning tools. We gather data and really look at this very closely when identifying what type of preservation or even reconstruction areas that we want to do on our roadways. And the biggest advantage of the STIP, again, is that we do get to leverage those federal funds. Our price agreements, again, this is all from our state maintenance funds, completely state allocated. This gives all the information to the districts on how to, or which methods are available to them and which contracts are available to perform the pavement preservation. A lot of these contracts are for 1 year, but we have the ability to extend it for an additional 4 years without having to rebid it. So truly, we try to use it about 2 to 3 years at the most, and we have to go through the rebidding process. But when we do the rebidding process, we'll look at the specs, we'll look at the items, we'll talk to the contractors and districts, see what we can improve and how we can change it. But this gives us a tool in place for a minimum of about 2 to 3 years and a maximum about 5 years that we can continuously use, and then the districts can prepare and plan for that in advance, talk to the contractors, get schedules established, and work that out. This is probably the method that we utilize the most and get most of our pavement preservation, because we have the ability to, in advance, talk to the contractors and work out the arrangements with the districts on schedules and things like that. So it is a very valuable tool. This is a list of all the 8 price agreements. And again, this covers a majority of our areas. Outside of price agreements, we always have the ability to negotiate through a 3-bid process for things like that. That gets a little more complex, because then at the end you have to make sure that you're fairly defining all the work and everything so we can get even bids across the board. This is why we have the price agreements in place. These cover probably a majority of the work that we do, but again, we'll have to go outside these price agreements for some of the specialty work as it's defined, with the hopes that our construction projects can cover some of these that the price agreements don't. And then again, internal forces, our chip seal forces, these are the districts that are out there actually doing the working. The DOT has invested in our personnel and in our equipment. In training, we make sure that these guys are up to speed so that when we do the hot, warm weather and we have the ability to actually do the chip seal process, our guys are out there doing it. And it's very complex. I mean, you guys know better than me, all the traffic control associated with it, all the setup, getting the equipment cleaned and everything. Those crews do just that when the chip seal season is there. So this is what their primary focus is, unless we have other higher priorities. But this is another tool where if we know we're not going to contract it out, we'll have our guys ready to do it, specifically on those lower volume roads in those really rural areas. That's where we tackle these. Outside of those things, the DOT has basically put together a lot of support staff. We have our asset management group that monitors the pavement conditions throughout the state. I wish I could tell you who the contractor we have that collects the data, but we've contracted with them. They collect it and update it continuously. Our goal is to try to make sure that every roadway, every segment is covered every 2 years so that the data is not old. As you all know, during the construction process, it usually takes about 2 or 3 years sometimes to get them done. So the data in and of itself gets aged as you're developing the project, but at least we have the baseline data to make decisions on how we want to approach a project. So the asset management program is a good program, but again, it's just a baseline. We also have a lot of other crews that go and collect information on coring and data to update it and supplement it so we can determine what we're truly going to do. The asset management program is just a baseline to figure out our initial plan. We provide that data to the consultants and to the districts whenever they're doing their planning for projects and or pavement preservation projects. We also have our labs. They'll go out and collect coring data to see what's really going on. If there's a question as to where does this fall in preservation, is it somewhere right in the middle? How do we truly decide what we're going to do? We'll go out and collect the data. So our labs will consult with our asset management individuals, find the locations, determine how many cores to do, and then pull the data so we can have some better information to make our decisions. And then obviously my bureau with the State Maintenance Bureau, we manage the price agreements. We're also responsible for coordinating with all the districts to try to make sure we're doing things as consistently as possible. What I've learned is that the 6 districts are all unique. So there are things that they're going to do different, but my job is to make sure that we're doing it as consistently as possible so consultants, contractors, everyone know what to expect universally. There's got to be flexibility built into that system, and there is, but I try to keep things as consistently as possible. We write the specs again, we coordinate with the districts and the contractors to see what we need to do to revise those specs, but our department plays that role. So primarily those 3 support staff, the asset management, the lab, and myself, we have all the tools available. We'll talk consistently how to disseminate that to the districts and give that information to the districts where they execute the plans. The things I've just spoken about are really what have made us successful. And what we've learned recently is that because we have this in place, we can overcome a lot of the challenges that we've had most recently. There are a lot of things that we've faced that made our jobs a little bit more difficult, but we've been able to tackle it as best we can. Our vacancy rate at the DOT is significant. We're just losing employees left and right. People are retiring, and we're just not getting a lot of the younger engineers and or personnel to do the work out in the field. Right now, with the groups that I just talked about, the lab has a 50% vacancy rate on the positions associated with asphalt testing and design. So we have half as much as we did 3 or 4 years ago, but the work hasn't slowed down. So a lot of us have to do a lot more. My department has a 60% vacancy rate. When I got promoted, the only person I supervise is myself at this point in time. So it's hard to figure out how to manage that, but we've been able to do that in tapping into other resources within the DOT and the consultants. But it's always nice to have the internal personnel to assist you because you know that they're there. So the vacancy rate we've had right now is very difficult, and we're struggling with that. I think you've probably heard from people here talking to the tables is that we had a very significant drought here in New Mexico, and the northern states were hit hard. That's our mountainous region. We had very significant wildfires that impacted several smaller communities. So the DOT made the commitment to help with assisting with those wildfires. And that was clearing brush and even helping with evacuations and such. So districts 4 and 5 were pretty wrapped up in that when the fires were going. Well, once the fires stopped, the rain decided to come. And now we have a lot of floods that are going on. So again, their resources were allocated to assisting with debris cleanup and making sure the culverts were cleaned, and any kind of maintenance, not necessarily associated with road use, but damage from the fire was being done by those districts. So almost this entire chip seal season in 4 and 5 has been utilized by doing fire mitigation and not chip seal. But still, whenever they have a small window, the districts are out there doing it. So they're doing the best they can again. Turnover, a lot of our administration has moved on. And you got people like me who don't have all the expertise in the world trying to explain to you guys what we do. And I think I've learned more in the past day than I did the past 3 months. So the turnover in new personnel trying to learn what they're doing is something else that we are experiencing at this point in time. Funding, we were happy 2 years ago when we got additional funding. We were sad when inflation hit us. At this point in time, it really looks like inflation is probably going to exceed the amount of additional funding that we got. So where we thought we were going to do more projects and plan to do so, we just can't because the money still isn't there. But the expectation is that we still get those projects done. So we need to figure out how to do that. And that, again, has been a challenge. Associated, again, with escalation, those price agreements I've told you about, when the contractors bid on them, they give us a unit bid for specific items. Well, when inflation hits, they have the ability or they want to negotiate new prices. And we have escalation provisions in the contract, but those do take time. So we have to make sure we're being as fair as possible. We'd love to spend our time in making sure that the work's being done right, but now we have to look at the escalation. It's only fair that we do so. So that's been a challenge. And more often than not, at the end, we've decided to prematurely rebid these projects because of the escalation. And that also takes time and money, obviously. But that's something that we've tackled. All in all, I think we're still doing a great job. Looking at the information that has been presented to me, even with the difficulties that we had recently, we are still on pace to do as many lane miles of pavement preservation through those 3 methods that I talked about, the same amount from about 4 to 5 years this year. I think the following year, when we look at the data, will probably be a little bit of a dip, mainly because of 4 and 5 being tied up with the wildfires, but we are still keeping up. It is a struggle. We go home and complain about it. My kids and wife ignore me, but that's okay. But we're getting the job done. And again, I think it all goes back to the districts. What I've described to you is some of our struggles at the GO and getting the planning done. Once we get the planning done, those guys execute the projects. So the districts are doing a very good job in keeping up with everything, and that's the management on doing the price agreements and also their internal forces. So that basically what I want to talk about and give you. Hopefully at the next conference, I will have data at my disposal and I can tell you truly how we're improving or what's going on, and I can present that fun information that you guys have shared with us. So thank you.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Andrew.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.